First off, I want to thank the brave men and women who work behind the wall. I want to thank them on a national level because their job goes unrecognized.
How do they try to turn a guard?
Well, correctional officer. Sorry, I apologize. But correctional officer.
How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Chair Talk. Guys, last episode we put up, we talked about the dangers of the job. What I mean by dangers is when you're effective, when you're that correctional officer that chases after that contraband and not afraid to say no, when you become that obstacle for inmates to do illegal activity, the dangers that come your way may not always be just present within that prison environment. It could also travel outside into that personal world of yours. And what we want to have now is we're going to share a discussion today with Russ Hamilton. Russ has been greenlit by gangs, and I kind of want to share his story. Guys, we never really share anything personal, but this needs to be shared because we want to highlight the dangers of what we do, not just for us to understand, because obviously we need to know. We need to be very careful of what we do behind that wall, but also the public needs to know. And I think that a dialogue like this is the time for it. Hey, Russ, real quick, do you mind introducing yourself to our audience?
Yeah, my name's Russ Hamilton. I spent 27 years with California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. I've spent some time out there on the juvenile side of things as well. Now I dabble a little bit in reentry and rehabilitation. And I have a site on Facebook called Keepers of Chaos that's dedicated to the professional men and women of correctional law enforcement.
Love it, Russ. And I love that Facebook page. I'm happy that you actually have created this venue. You even have mentoring. You have a bunch of stuff that's offered there. And that community is just a great community. I mean, it really does. Not only does it have like great information, but it uplifts. Because I've seen some people that, were looking for support, and your community. My birthday was recently, and just the shout outs that I got was, it made my day. So I just love what you're doing with that channel. And I love how you're moderating it as well, making sure it's professional. So bravo, really a fan of what you're doing. All right, guys. So we're going to go to our sponsor. And when we come back, we are going to be discussing a personal story from Russ, possibly a few, because Russ has been greenlit a few times. But again, we're sharing the story in an effort for you to learn the dangers of being in corrections. And I think while we discuss this story, you're also going to see what measures need to be taken from the higher level to make sure, one, that you protect your staff, but two, you keep them motivated by protecting your staff. So it's going to be an interesting dialogue. So now, guys, if you haven't, the show Chair Talks for you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Again, sponsor. We come back. Let's hear Russ's story. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it. It's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
All right, and we are back. So, Russ, the reason why I wanted to have this discussion with you is because of what happened recently in Canada. Now, I don't know the full details. All I do know is you had an officer that was in his car, shot at. Sadly, the officer passed. And the first thing we thought as correctional professionals when we found out this person was a correctional officer is we did automatically relate it to the duties of our job and the dangers. And the funny thing is, Russ, when I had this discussion with Connie the other day, we touched into, that there's still people from the public that believe inmates should have cell phones because they don't really think like how connected these inmates still are, how they still have power behind that wall. So I would like to share, the story of when you've been greenlit. Now, remember, guys, we don't really share many stories here, but Russ did want to volunteer this story because it does touch on the dangers of what we do. So Russ, do you mind sharing maybe your first green light story?
Sure. This is one of those issues where, I really want to employ a lot of candor But there's definitely some parts of some of these stories that I'll hold back for my own personal reasons. You know, when you're out there, if you're an effective officer, especially if you're an effective officer, the chances of you pissing off the wrong person is extremely high. Towards the extreme later part of my career with California Department of Corrections, I was involved in some situations where I was really putting a lot of hurt on a lot of inmates with respect to the amount of contraband that I was intercepting. And I mean, like on a daily basis, cell phones, drugs, weapons. My last 2 years, when I went back after retiring as a sergeant, I took more than 55 weapons off of our yards at the facility that I was at. And so, needless to say, this was kind of almost my last hurrah. I was within the last few weeks of doing my retired annuitant thing. And I had really pissed this one specific gang off already. But we had a situation where I was the dining hall officer, and I had inmates egressing from the kitchen area. And this one particular inmate had decided that he wanted to, you know, just directly in front of me, challenge me and just steal extra lunches, as if I was going to, you know, just lay down and not do anything about it. So I had pulled him aside, and he started to get real mouthy. I had kind of signaled to my sergeant to come over, because I already knew that this one was going to, you know, go the distance. And anyway, just as the sergeant got there, the guy spun and tried to get me. The sergeant had grabbed him. I came at the guy from behind. The sergeant suplexed the guy, and we ended up in a situation where there was quite a bit of blood from this individual and what had happened. At that point, fortunately, we had other people responding. The rest of the inmates in the chow hall got up and tried to get to us, but we were able to basically have a standoff, and that was about it for the particular incident part of it. And we were able to, you know, put this inmate and several other inmates in segregation, make the area safe. And then I went directly home and ended up, actually, I was going down to Disneyland at the time. And we got down there, and my wife and I, we were finishing up with our first evening there. And I saw my phone ring, and I saw that it was work. And I already knew that what it was going to be. And it was, you know, it was the lieutenant from our investigations unit telling me that this particular group had put a hit out on me. And, you know, it was over all of the contraband stuff. It was over all of the other inmates that I had sent to SEG. And it was over this particular incident where me and my sergeant had got into it with this inmate physically. And supposedly what they were going to do is they were going to absolutely beat us down until we were unconscious. That was part of the plan. They ended up putting additional inmates in SEG. There was definitely a component of it that I was worried about moving to the streets, because these guys had that kind of access and stuff. And, you know, it was a sobering thought. And this is not my first rodeo. This was not the first time I had ended up in potential jeopardy for just doing my job. But this was the last time. And you know, it's one thing that, you know, we just have to take into account. It's one of those things that if you're going to be that officer that's going to be at the tip of the spear, these things are going to come your way. I have lots of friends that have had this happen to them. And you do what you can to mitigate it. But in the end, you know, it's just very scary, very unsettling. And this officer who unfortunately apparently lost his life in this situation up in Canada, I mean, my heart goes out, because I know what that feels like to have that kind of danger hanging over you I don't know if he knew ahead of time this was a possibility, but I do know the end result. And so this is something we need to speak about, talk about, and hopefully we're going to give some information here that's going to help you, mitigate these things.
Well, first, and thanks for sharing the story, Russ. I know we don't really share many personal things, but I thought we could explore this because in the effort of having this dialogue, what I'm hoping to do is to kind of throw out what we expect to be done from the agency as well as what we can do. So the first thing I want to get before we go back to what the agency should do, I just want to continue where you're at real quick. So you're at Disneyland, you get this phone call. How do you tell your family? Do you not tell your family? I mean, what's the next step?
Well, for me in this case, it was just like automatic. But I did have, I had that pit, that gut, that was just tight, and I didn't want to tell my wife, but I decided I better go ahead and tell her. And I just said, hey, look, there's been a threat. I don't think that it's the type of threat that will go to the outside. I can't say for sure. I do know that there's going to be a problem when I go back onto the yard. And so basically, she took it really well. She's just like, hey, do what you got to do and be careful. And so, it ended up, fortunately, we got most of the rabble rousers, if you will, moved off of the yard. And I only had like a couple of weeks left. And so I thought that what I should probably do is just, go ahead and just kind of, turn the heat down for the next couple weeks and just kind of let things slide. And I put that plan into action for about 11 or 12 seconds. And then I kind of just said, screw it. And I turned the heat back up and I went at them all the harder. And I took more dope. I took more weapons. I took more phones. And on my very last day, the very last day that I worked as a correctional peace officer, I took a weapon off of that yard.
Hey, Russ, first off, I knew you would never be able to turn it down because we know you. So, try to convince Russ, to turn it down. Hey, so there's always a debate whether you should tell your family or not. I am a firm believer that your family should know. Only because one thing is, as you're expressing it to them, it's more for information, but not really to get them worried. But, I think they need to know because God forbid if something does happen, they're the one that's going to lead the fight for your cause. So, you want them to know in case there's, possible lawsuits if the agency didn't handle things correctly in the effort to protect you, So I tell my family if there was ever a concern, only because God forbid, not to scare you, because I'm not a shit officer, by the way. If I don't antagonize, I just do what's expected of me. And for the most part, inmates should expect that from me. I should be that obstacle. But I'm not. I was never an asshole being that obstacle. Like it was never personal to me. I did my job because that was what was expected. Some people, if they do their job, but they're an asshole on top of it, then they usually get that attitude. But sometimes you can have officers that are very effective. And the inmates, even though you become that obstacle, they still have that respect. It's just the game. They're going to do their thing and your job is to catch them. But I always told my family, like if something was to happen, the reason why I want them to be in the know is because, there could be something that maybe the agency maybe didn't do correctly. You don't know. And I would like you to continue the fight for me because in the end, if there's something that could have been done that wasn't done by the agency, sue, get the money, do whatever you have to do because, if you don't know, then no one's going to continue battling for what you are entitled for. So that was my reason why I told my family. But again, it's not an effort to add to their concerns. It's just more of information. Would you agree with that? Because you ever notice, Russ, that after an incident happens, we all do stick together, don't get me wrong. But in the end, it is the family that is left behind, not knowing what the hell happened. And I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, I think the real thing to keep in mind is you should be pushing that information forward. It should be information that's enough for them to maybe take some measures. I think that one thing we have to be careful of, though, is trying to think that we understand what's in an inmate or a group of inmates' head with regard to how they're going to handle an officer or a situation. These people, they don't act or react in the same way we do because they have a different set of values, or as I like to call them, anti-values. So don't project. Don't think that because you keep it professional that they're not going to take things personally, or that they're not going to act in a personal fashion. In the end, it's going to be dictated by things that may or may not be in your control. And so you just have to be the best officer that you can be, and be dealing with the situation in the most professional manner that you can. And you have to make the decisions as they come for yourself. I've had I'll talk briefly about one other situation. It wasn't a green light situation, but it was where I was at a movie theater, and someone from unknown distance threw a rock and hit me directly in the head. I knew instantly that it had to be an inmate that knew me, because I'm not that kind of person to run around town and have personal enemies. Fortunately, I was able to egress from the area. I was able to call and make a report on it. I was a good boy that day. I was well healed, as it were. But you never know when you're in that crowded situation what could potentially break loose. So be sure that anything that happens to you, whether there's even if it's you get some weird phone call or something like that, report that upward. Let the chain deal with it. They get paid to do all that. Don't think that you're bothering people unnecessarily. The next thing is if you're active, you should have your social media account either locked down. If you don't, it should be the kind of media account that's dedicated. And I believe it or not, I know some guys that have taken it this far that have social media accounts dedicated to counterintelligence, to put them in places where they've never been, never lived, and with people that they've never known. But those are some of my friends that have been in some more extreme cases than me. And just, the ultimate thing, though, that you have to remember is you have to be able to function and be effective regardless of the way you feel about it. And, that's a difficult thing to do at times, to go in there every single day and not be dissuaded from carrying out your duty.
Yeah, so I like what you said at the very beginning. For the officers that are very effective, the moment you say that no, the moment you become that obstacle, you are, giving yourself that potential chance to become that enemy, towards that inmate population, towards the ones that are trying to maneuver and make their living behind the wall. And our job is to stop that illegal living. And the other thing I have here is that the first thing I want to mention is, if you're ever threatened, you yourself have to take each threat seriously. Don't laugh it off. Even if it's like, yo, CO, I'm gonna fuck you up. It's a serious threat. Write it up. Even if the inmate goes, yo, you're gonna have something coming your way, still write it up. I don't care if the inmate says, I was talking about suing you. Doesn't matter. It didn't come off that way. It's a threat to me. And if inmate goes, yeah, I'm gonna make a contact on the streets, write the report it up, and then now it becomes the agency's job in all efforts to protect you. That's their job, because that protection encourages us to what? It motivates us to be that effective officer. Now, if I feel that I'm being threatened and the charges are being dropped, or the investigators who have the ability to look to see if there's any validity to these outside threats are not checking inmates' mails, are not checking their phone calls, then there's nothing motivating me to do my job, because one, you're telling me my life's not even worth it. So, what do you expect first, Russ, from the person who receives a threat? What should their next steps be?
Okay, so the person that receives the threat, Usually that person has to send it, up the chain. If they are that person that will actually do the investigation and stuff, they should be, calling there to the facility and saying, hey, this particular inmate, he needs to be locked down. We also need to put, anything that he's trying to mail out, we need to know about. In segregation, that's really possible that they would, go ahead and be looking at all that stuff. The next thing to do is to assess what type of threat this really is. Is this an inmate that has a lot of juice, as we call it, that he has the influence to actually carry something out because he does have an element of his crimes and stuff that were involved with gangs, as it were, and that's probably the most significant threat. Now, the other type of threat that exists is if he holds sway over someone that's just willing to do it because he's got some crazy friends or a crazy girlfriend, or if he's short to the house and he's the kind of crazy psychopathic killer that would do something stupid like that, you have to take that into account. For the most part, and I don't want anyone to get complacent over this, for the most part, threats tend to be situational, episodic, and something that's said in the heat of the moment. But that doesn't mean that you can just slough it off and not do something about it. Always document and always expect that the person that you've documented and sent this threat up to, that they're going to come back with a report that's going to detail what they think the extent of that threat is. If they're not doing that, they're not doing their job. Then they're just like looking at it and not giving, any credence to it, and not, running that chain out as far as they can to try and figure out just how big a threat is presented to you. One of the things that they look at is, has this person ever carried out a threat before? Have they ever carried it out on the streets? Have they carried it out inside the prison? These are all things you want to know. I've had inmates on the inside that, they were just going to straight carry out the threat themselves. I had one particular incident where I got pulled partway into a tray slot where this particular inmate, just to give you an idea, he had 884 points, and a max inmate only has to have 57. So this guy was really carrying out threats against lots of officers. And, what happened to me is, I ended up with some, permanent nerve damage in the hand. So never take anything lightly.
You hit on a lot of good points there, because the one thing is, I like what you say where, the first thing you want from the agency, once the threat's been noted, is to have that inmate in some type of investigative housing where they're closed off from communication, or again, we always got to be careful about words, because when the lawyers come out and say, well, you're stopping that inmate from communicating, no, we're stopping that inmate from having an influence over others. That's the key. Right now, we don't know what this inmate is really capable of doing. So to make an effort to protect the protectors, we have to put them in a spot where their influence is very limited, and we're going to go ahead and monitor everything that they are or was sending out, if there is. And then to make sure that even if you have to let that inmate get back to that communication, that that inmate's on that list. You're checking their mail all the time. There should be a hot list. That you're checking their mail, checking those phone calls, because all that stuff is being recorded. But the first step you want from that higher level management is that immediate zero tolerance for any type of threat, that removal of that inmate, placed into some type of isolated confinement. And yes, guys, I'm going to use the word, it is what it is, because again, the isolated confinement protects us from that inmate being able to influence others. If that's not done by the agency, and God forbid something happens to your loved one, this is where your family has the lawsuit. This is where your family can come in, because now your loved one has documented that there was a threat. Now, by the way, guys, that's another thing. It's good to always have a copy of your reports. If I get threatened, I document that I was threatened. I'm going to turn that in. Hopefully the charge, gets validated or whatever it is. But in the meantime, I also take a copy of that and bring that home. You can bring a copy of your report card before you have that number on it. You bring a copy of it, and God forbid something was to happen, your loved one has a copy of that report. So when people say, we don't know about this threat, no one ever told us he was threatened by this person. Well, guess what? Here's a copy of his report. Here's a copy of the charge. Here's a copy of the email that he sent out to his supervisor saying that there's something up with him and this inmate. And guys, we have seen this played out before in a few cases, which includes what happened in Delaware, which includes what happened in North Carolina a few years back. We're making documentations, no one's listening, and now the concern becomes now my loved one is hurt. And the sad thing is the family, because the loved one did not tell the family what was happening, the family has nothing that they can lean on. So documentation too, right, Russ? And letting your family, get a copy of that.
Yeah, I know that oftentimes we don't want to think in that worst case scenario thing. And we would hope that, everything would, just turn out all right. God forbid something did happen to us. But you know what? Leave those paper trails so that people can follow them. Leave those electronic trails. One of the things, especially about some of the bigger agencies, is those electronic trails are saved forever and ever and always. So if you want to, leave a breadcrumb for someone to follow, send out an email regarding that. And, it's not going to go away unless, someone just has so much juice that they could actually cause it to be erased. So there's lots of ways that you can help, leave that trail, leave those clues, and make it so that, your loved ones would have these breadcrumbs to follow, that they would have, something left behind of a probative value to prove that, maybe the agency didn't do what they should. And there's a lot of that going on. You especially, you bring up North Carolina, Megan Callahan. I mean, come on, man. She already knew that particular inmate presented a threat to her specifically. And that's what happened. So, don't go in there thinking that you shouldn't be, taking some precautions.
And I was bringing up Delaware because of Lieutenant Floyd. And I haven't spoken with the family. I love the email too, guys. Sometimes sometimes you got to do this where you send a follow-up email to someone specific and in charge, but not a generalized email to anyone. Someone specific. Hold them responsible to your supervisor. Hey, by the way, I just want you to know I don't know if you're aware, I got a charge going up about a threat, and I just want to make sure that this matter really does get looked into. And, again, that's even follow up with the investigative authorities. You want to know, not just the outcome of the investigation, but you want to know, the method. I mean, how seriously are they taking it? Have they called family? Have they tried to, see where the inmate's influence can be? Or are they just, this threat has no validity because when we interviewed the inmate said, you know what, this was just situational and, that won't happen again. Or maybe it could be a source for them. You don't know. But either way, the inmates crossed the line and you need to go at all levels. And I believe what I would like to see is that when the outcome is done of that investigation, I don't know if there's a conflict for this, but I believe it should be done where the investigation, the completed investigation, does go back to the person who was threatened so they can know, okay, this was a good exhaustive measure. Or if it wasn't, they can bring up the concerns. Hey, I also noticed that this inmate on the wing talks to these other inmates. You only may know what you see on paper, but I also work the unit. So I'm aware of other inmates that they connect themselves to. I don't see that they were spoken to. Like Russ said, you have that gang guy, or you have that guy that just has somebody that will do something crazy for him. Now, I may not see that on paper, but when I'm an officer working the unit, I could see a rapport. I could see who they're able to have control on that you may not be able to see because, again, I work in the unit every day. So did you go to the unit? Did you interview these inmates? Did you make an effort that shows me that you care and value my life? That's the key. And I think ultimately that's what builds the trust, Russ. That's what makes us want to go back and continue doing the job when you know that the higher ups are zero. You threaten my officer, not a problem. Get that guy. I mean, we do it all the time. Get that guy, TAH, put him in administrative housing, get the investigation going, get the investigators looking into it. Zero tolerance when it comes to any type of threat that's faced on our staff in any way, level, or form. Because in the end, if you're not treating that with zero tolerance, you're also telling the staff that you're not worth it. That to me, that's the biggest concern for me. One last thing, and again, this is more personal. Things that can happen on the outside. And sometimes what happens is, and this is just another piece of advice, I wanted to get Russ's perspective on this, but sometimes, guys, we give up our routines without really thinking we are, which means coming to work with that, quick check coffee, little things that the inmates could pick up on where they can kind of put together, like, I know this guy every morning does this. Again, we leave work at the same, hopefully at the same time every day in that same vehicle. So it's really not that hard for the inmates to make a call to the outside and say, hey, at 10 o'clock, this person leaves work, or they start work at 2, and I know at some time they're going to be on quick check, probably in this area, to get a coffee. And guess what? Maybe there's a quick check close to the prison. So maybe the person, to get the hottest coffee possible, they get one right by the prison. So there are certain routines that the inmates could say, hey, this is where this person's going to be. And having said that, now you could be putting your life at risk. I mean, do you think we should be very wary of the things that we do, like those routines that we may not realize the inmates could pick up on?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends on how much you're willing to just, sit down and think about what the possibilities are and what you can do to counter them. Making sure you don't bring identifiable things in, that's a part of the counter surveillance game. Another part of the counter surveillance game is being aware of where you're driving, taking different routes home from work, doing 2 or 3 checks by, turning off before you get home and seeing if you're being followed, seeing if you're noticing those cars behind you. Does it sound like I'm kind of paranoid? Yeah. But at the same time, when you discover that kind of thing, where, someone is following you, or that kind of thing where, someone has put a hit out on them. I remember one officer we had hit put out on, and they were supposedly going to hit her on the outside. And, I spent a couple of nights, making sure that we were, driving her home. We were armed. She was armed. And, we did all of those things with respect to, making sure that we checked out, who was behind us, who was in front of us. Any car that we passed, did it, pull in behind us and try and follow us. So these things are real. They're, every bit as dangerous as anything a street level officer faces, and perhaps more so because we know what the outcome can be for these particular inmates that, have, high level connections to some of these gangs. I mean, we've seen it in the past, multiple staff deaths from gangs inside the prisons. So for what it's worth, just be careful, be smart, do what you're supposed to do, run it up the chain if you don't know. And, if you're concerned about something, document it.
Yeah. Hey, Russ, anything you'd like to say in closing?
Yeah, I think one thing I would like to add on, especially for any administrators out there, I always, as an officer, a sergeant, whatever, wanted to feel like the last battle I had to face was anything to do with a threat. Make sure that you've got my back, and I'll go out there and produce for you. Make me feel like I'm free to engage in tactics and strategies and things like that, so that I don't have to worry about being nitpicked, picked apart, and things, on a level where you're just, messing with me. You're not acting like you have my back. You're not taking threats against me seriously. And you take that off of my back, and I'll go out there and I'll produce every single day. I will make your facility safer. I will make everyone in that facility safer. But you know what? If you don't have the backs of your people out there, then what are they left to do? They won't be out there doing the job. They won't be putting down those serious security breaches. Those security breaches, you won't find out about them until it's too late and something horrible has happened. We have to fight that kind of complacency, and we have to be in that realm of critical thinking where we're able to think these things through. And then last but not least, of course, is being proactive and preemptive in all of these bad potential scenarios.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm going to say something. I have to be objective here. We said right now that you have to take all threats seriously, which means that we have to do whatever we can to make sure that we ensure that these threats have validity. That comes with the charge, and that comes with our effort to make sure that we stand by the words that we're writing on that documentation. Now, sad thing is, guys, sometimes custody, when they want an inmate off the unit, they may kind of fall back into that. Inmate threatened me, and maybe the inmate didn't, but they're kind of leaning on that to motivate the move. Problem is, once you get a lot of those, then the real threats on staff lose validity. They do, guys. If you want an inmate off the unit, do it the right way. Do what it is that you have to do. Write your reports, write your documentation. But when it comes to the threats, when you keep on writing these bogus threats that aren't happening, because, you're looking just to kind of motivate a move, then what happens is when those charges get presented, they start to be like, oh, you know what? It's the same officer writing the same thing. You know what it means? At one point, they start looking at the officer, questioning the officer's credibility. What you want to do is, when it's real, guys, when it's legit, is when you write it so it has value. So when the hearing officer sees it, they know it's not the boy crying wolf, and they act on it accordingly. That's the key, because I know right now there's always that concern where you have people writing certain charges that they're kind of doing that just to kind of get the inmate off the unit. But the sad thing is all the resources are going to those charges that are really not official technically. And now when you need those resources to go to the real charges where this person is really being threatened, it's not taken seriously at that point, and all the resources have been spent on some of the bogus charges that some of the officers may be writing just to motivate a move. Russ, you have any thoughts on that, Russ, before we go? I wanted to add that because I want to make sure people know that we have to make sure that when we, do these charges, that they're legit charges, because if not, they start to lose that level of validity and how serious people start to take it.
Yeah. If I was going to address that, here's what I would say is that, if you're an officer and you have a problem inmate in your area and you think that the answer is getting rid of that inmate, you're wrong, because you're just trying to pass him off to someone else. If the inmate is an actual real threat in some way, you ought to be able to make a move in some way in order to actually do a real removal, where maybe they get sent to seg for a while and then they need that charge adjudicated so that they end up in a different unit or a higher level of custody. But if you're just in there thinking that, because this inmate's a pain in my ass that I need to move him, well, what's wrong with you? Because you're just going to pass that on to someone else. Man up, step up, and deal with the situation.
I'll tell you something. What you said right now is going to hit home. We got to do a whole topic on that, on those that do that. But again, the reason why I wanted to get to that last part, and I was thinking about it, the whole dialogue, but I wanted to get it out, is because I know it happens. And like Russ said, I couldn't have said it better. It kind of pushed the buck. But the problem is when you start writing those bogus charges, the people that start writing the real ones, they're not taken as serious. And it's true. So again, you got to realize that your actions could affect other people's actions. So yeah, I had to say it. I had to put it out there, and let's see how that gets taken. And again, that's not everyone. Want to make sure everybody, it's not everyone, but there could be that one person. And I want you to watch this video and see how that could affect how that could affect others. All right, guys. So if you haven't, the show Tear Talks to you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. Bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Stay safe.